A very good question, important. The Eightfold Path, is that really a step-by-step development? Is there a clear-cut order from 1 to 8? Now the Buddha, one feature of his teaching is that he teaches gradually. So quite invariably when he talks about the development, about bhavana, he organizes that in a gradual exposition and also in a gradual manner how we can practice. So there is meaning to it, that it goes from number 1, wide view, to number 8, the wide samadhi, and then also the 2 additional factors for an arahant when the Noble Eightfold Path has been developed. Then there's also wide knowledge and wide liberation. It would be 9 and 10. However, this is not to be understood like a staircase. In a staircase, you have to first step on the first step, and then once you're on that, then you can step on the second, and then you go to the third, and there's nothing to do with the first one anymore. It's not like for 1 year you do only wide view, and then you have finished wide view, and now you do wide intention for 1 year, and then you have finished it, and then you do wide communication, and so on. It's not so strictly gradual. In reality, all these path factors interrelate. However, Buddha particularly pointed out that wide view goes ahead. For example, you talked about the wide intention, and in order to practice wide intention or wide thinking, you got to know what is wide intention, what is wrong intention. Else it would be impossible. So to do any kind of practice for wide intention, you have to have at least that much wide view that you have some understanding what is wide intention. And similar for all other path factors. So in particular the fact that some basic conviction or faith or an opinion, wide view has to be there to get started, that is fully undeniable. However, this is not yet the complete wide view, because the complete wide view will only occur through liberating insight, and liberating insight will only occur when all 8 path factors operate in unison. They have to all operate together. And then as a result of that, the deep insight occurs, the defilements are destroyed, and one realizes what is called lokuttara Sammādiṭṭhi, transcendental wide view, which is based now on bhavana and insight and realization in one's heart. Now that is a higher level of wide view. So you start with a very simple one. You study some teaching of the Buddha, certain things make sense to you, certain teachings you listen to on YouTube or from monks or whoever, and then you have that amount of wide view, and it's enough to get you going. And as you then continue practicing, this wide view will be gradually more and more refined, and you will usually widen your wide view and deepen it through more study, through observation. The study is not just book reading or reading the suttas or listening to talks. Study is also watching how the Eightfold Path operates in your own mind, in your own life, in your own action and thinking. And as you're watching that and observing, your wide view will strengthen. You will get confirmations of some things which we had doubts about. You will see some of the results the Buddha talks about coming in. That strengthens your conviction, your wide view. And then at some stage, when all 8 path factors work together and liberating insight occurs, then there's a quantum leap to the wide view of an Arya-Pugala, of someone who has a vision of Dhamma, understands the Four Noble Truths. That is still not the highest form of wide view. That is still not the wide knowledge and wide liberation of an arahant. So and after that the practice still continues. And very important is to see that these path factors feed into each other. The Buddha talks about, I think it's Mahachattarisikha, the great 40 sutta in Majjhima Nikaya. For example, we talked about wide intention already, say wide action. Wide action is defined as avoiding killing living beings intentionally, as avoiding stealing, avoiding sensual misconduct, and avoiding alcohol and intoxicants. Now, in order, first of all, to know that is wide view. So wide view is already there. But then you also need mindfulness. Even if you know it's wrong to kill, but when the March fly comes and bites you out of the blue, you maybe, before you know, you squash it, because it can be quite painful and people get quite scared, they can draw blood. You need good mindfulness to avoid that. Other creatures, when a mosquito bites you. Similar with the third precept, when people get infatuated with someone, before they know, they break the third precept. Or maybe not so suddenly, but they slide into that. It happens quite gradually, but very powerfully. So we need mindfulness and wide view. And then, of course, you need wide effort. If someone is very infatuated, so much in love, but they are both married, but then an opportunity presents itself, maybe both their spouses are traveling or away, so you need, first of all, the real conviction that you want to keep that precept. Secondly, you need mindfulness. You have to notice that if I go into this situation, if I visit this person late at night time, who knows what happens, better not. Now, this is a mindfulness there. And then it needs wide effort. It takes great effort to resist that temptation. Particularly if the other person is maybe even flirtatious or outright temptatious and so on, seductive, requires a great effort. It's the same when we're talking about wide intention. Maybe the anger arises in the mind. Now we need wide view to understand that anger is always unwholesome. It's never recommended by the Buddha. That might sound trivial, but it is easy to get convinced that sometimes what one may call righteous indignation is actually good. And if someone is really wrong, or if someone is a terrorist, or if someone is, whatever terms they're using, a Nazi or a racist or a terrorist or whatever terms are put onto people, so to convince you now it is actually good to be angry at them. Not being angry doesn't mean that you're condoning the actions of someone, that you're agreeing or supporting it. But one can disagree and try to prevent it without being angry. So there is no righteous indignation in the Buddha's teaching. This is why this simile is so powerful. The Buddha said, even if murderers or terrorists are sawing off your arms and legs, anyone who is getting angry would not practice his teaching. This is not so much meant for someone who is in that situation. Because if you're really in that situation, it would require a lot not to get angry. And also, it's not the intention of the Buddha. to teach that people, the person in that situation so much, because it's quite rare. But the Buddha wants to close that loophole that we often believe in a certain extreme situation the anger is actually right and correct. So we need that conviction. Sammādiṭṭhi is often translated as right view. You could also say right opinion. You could also say perfect conviction, perfect confidence. There's all these aspects. So we need that conviction that anger is unwholesome and unbeneficial. Then next you need strong mindfulness. Again, that sounds funny, but it's quite possible for a person to become angry without knowing that they're angry. I mean, you probably all have encountered that. You tell someone, no need to get angry. I'm not angry. This is quite possible that we are quite angry and somehow convince ourselves that we are not angry. And so this is where the mindfulness comes in particular for intention, because intention is a mental factor. It's much more subtle than action. Usually I can prevent my arm from suddenly going up or something. I have usually control over my bodily movements. It would be a little bit odd if I can't control what my arm is doing. So for bodily actions, we usually have a high level of control. But when it comes to mental factors like emotions arising, anger or desire or laziness or jealousy or conceit and so on, these things are quite subtle and difficult to control. And it requires sharp mindfulness to be aware of them. And then, of course, again, the right effort. If there's anger in the mind, it would be the second factor of right effort, to abandon an unwholesome mind state that has already arisen through the opposite. So this is where right view, right conviction comes in again. Now we have to know what is, or that anger is unwholesome, no good, dangerous. As they say, anger is only one letter away from danger. If you put a D in front of anger, you get danger. It's a good reminder. I've seen people in t-shirts like that. This is how I learned that. It looks good on the t-shirt. And so we have to know that, but then we also have to know how to abandon anger. And what is the direct antidote, the best, most powerful opposing quality to anger? Loving kindness, metta, as a direct opposite. So we can bring up the loving kindness, the intention of goodwill, unconditional goodwill to all beings. Maybe starting with that being we are feeling angry towards. Then bring that up in order to abandon the anger. Now, this is right view that we know, metta is the one I should be using now. And then the right effort. Now, once the anger has been abandoned, we need mindfulness that we notice, I got out of that anger, the anger is now overcome. What do we do then? Exactly. The next factor of right effort, in this case, we already have some metta, because we worked with metta already. The metta helped us to abandon anger. But now we want to make the metta even stronger. Lead it to its culmination, and the culmination is something very big. There would be full samadhi on metta, with all the 11 benefits. So there, even once we have abandoned anger, and we may even feel some beautiful emotion of loving kindness to all beings. Now the heart is bright and radiant, the chest feels warm and relaxed. Now your body is at ease, and you have this beautiful feeling of wishing well to all beings. Now mindfully you notice that. But then you have the wide view that you remember there's also the factor number 4 of wide effort. You can even further expand that metta, lead it to full samadhi. If you do that, then you would be also cultivating samadhi, and that's number 8 in the Noble Eightfold Path. And it's very similar with, we talked wide action, the wide communication. In terms of subtlety, as I said, normally we know what our arms are doing, or legs. We have usually a high level of control and mindfulness about the body. When it becomes to thinking and mental factors, emotions, that is very subtle and it's very hard to even keep track with mindfulness. And communication, the speech, is in between. So it's a good area for practice, for training. Because it is more subtle than action, it's very easy to get into wrong speech. And it takes more mindfulness. When you write emails, it takes lots of mindfulness, not to write something upsetting or irritating or leading to misunderstanding. And when we are putting out the videos on TikTok, it's probably not our age group. No? Is there anyone here who is publishing TikTok videos? Do you have a TikTok account? It's not our age group here. No? You have Facebook? Facebook. I thought that's only the oldies. Insta? Do you have Insta? Oh yeah. I thought that's more the really young teenagers. Twitter? I refuse to call it X. Because what do you do then? You're Xing or what? Like with an X? In Twitter you could tweet, no, but what do you do with X? Xing is already when you use an X. So anyone has got Twitter? Or? But anyway, this is all communication. And people forget about that. The Buddha calls it the Samma Vaca, literally right speech, because in the Buddha's time that was almost all communication. They didn't write much. The teaching of the Buddha were not written down even until about 500 years later. They had a little bit of writing for accounting and things like that, but almost all communication was by speaking, whereas nowadays, if you have teenage children or grandchildren, they may be very quiet, they may be in their womb and you don't hear any speech or anything, but that doesn't mean they're not communicating. They're on the I'm always intrigued, usually when I'm traveling in the aircraft and so on, and then the particular younger people, it's unbelievably fast how they can type with 2 fingers. I think they're faster in 2 fingers than I type on 10 fingers on a proper board. So there's lots of communication happening on WhatsApp and Line and X and Insta and TikTok and YouTube and putting comments there. And this is a great area, first of all, to have wide view and knowing the factors of wide communication. Over to you, what are the factors of wide communication therefore? Well, let's start with the bad ones. What are the 4 wrong forms of communication? Lying. That is the one which is included in the 5 precepts. This is the most serious. Lying. Next. Harsh speech. That is insults, verbal abuse, 4-letter words, curses, and so on, or even just really yelling at people. What else? Divisive speech, exactly. And that is important to understand, that can be truthful. The Buddha gives an example. Say, B is telling me that A is really a stupid fellow. They're somehow upset with them, they come to me and they say, oh, A is really, I think they're really stupid. Next time I meet A, I say, oh, do you know what B is thinking about you, what he's saying? And then when I tell him, he told me he thinks you're stupid. Now A gets quite upset. And they probably say something negative as well. And they say, yeah, I always knew that B is a really arrogant, conceited person. Now I go back to B. Oh, do you know that A thinks you're really a conceited, arrogant, kind of awful person? And now A and B meet. Can you imagine what kind of meeting that is? How frosty that is? This is meant by malicious tale-bearing or a divisive speech. I mean, this is an extreme form. It's an extreme form, but you can imagine other, bit more subtle forms. But this is what is meant, and it's not lying. In this case, now I'm reporting accurately, truthfully what these people are saying. But there's a malicious intention. I do that to lower the opinion and to create conflict between these two. And one more. Exactly. In Pali it is called Sampapalapa. And even if you don't know Pali, you can maybe imagine, what does Sampapalapa blah blah blah, what does it mean? And blah blah blah. Idle chatter, gossiping, chatting someone's ear off. Did you hear what she said? Because he had heard that she had done this, and then she said that he had done that to her, and then she was so upset and said that he had said this. Huh? Is that actually really important? This kind of thing. So these are the four factors. The lying, the most serious, then harsh speech, divisive speech, and number 4, the useless speech. And actually communication. So you have to translate all of that into WhatsApp, YouTube, Insta, X, and so on. And if you look at how many Facebook posts, how many tweets will include that, it's probably the vast majority. So what are the 4 good ones? What can you happily publish on your Insta? Now, of course, truthful speech, truthful communication. Now, if one is strict with that, you would want to be careful not to spread any rumor, to repeat something, or to share something if you're not sure whether it's true. Someone sends you a tweet or post something on Facebook that this politician said this and this. Yeah, maybe he didn't actually say that, maybe it's actually wrong. But the moment you share that now, you kind of not take responsibility for that, and if it's complete fake or untrue, you may not fully intentionally speaking untruth there, but you have a certain negligence there that is spreading untruth more by negligence. And one should make sure that before you put it out, you should have some checking there about the accuracy. And else, why share it if you don't know whether it's true? Why sharing it? The harsh speech. I find that very striking how much less polite people are online and also in email. I think the reason is that biologically we are designed, we have all these instincts and conditioning when we have a human being in front of us. You've got to be really angry before you start yelling loudly at them. There's a certain natural restraint if we have physical interaction, because this is how we are conditioned, this is how we grow up, how we learn, and so on. And online, it seems these inhibitions are kind of lacking. And then also anonymity. Usually, if you're interacting with people, they know who you are. And if I was sitting here and I started yelling at you guys, I probably would damage my reputation quite badly as a Buddhist monk. But if someone is completely anonymous or think they are anonymous online, they may do all kinds of things. Yes, Antonio. I totally agree. And as someone mentioning, you don't have to say good morning, please, thank you, and so on when you interact with AI. I was thinking about that as well, but it's probably good to do it just to stay in the habit. Just to stay in the habit. To be aware that this is only lifeless electronic process. Kind of elaborate search or a language learning model, not an entity, not a real living being. There's no consciousness. However, even so, I think it can be a good idea to remain polite. And then the comments. I sometimes see that on our channel we have YouTube comments disabled because it would be very difficult to at least look at that, what's going on there, and we don't have time for doing that. And I'm sometimes surprised at what people are putting there. It's just really, really weird. And I think that they wouldn't do that in personal interaction. So it's good not to have online etiquette, email etiquette, keeping the factor of polite speech, speech that reaches the heart, speech that is easy on the ears, polite, respectful. Next one. Because you should use communication that leads to more harmony. And just look at what people are published on their Insta, on X, on YouTube and Facebook and so on. How much of that actually leads to more harmony? And how much is published to make people upset and divide the divisions, or deepen the divisions. So deliberately trying to use communication that brings those who are already against each other, that it makes it weaker. And those people who are neutral, that they come really close together. And the last one is meaningful speech, connected with the Dhamma, connected with freedom and liberation, connected with making good karma, connected with loving kindness and patience, with compassion, with encouraging others to be generous and compassionate, with encouraging others to develop wisdom and insight. That kind of communication.
Which side I have a conversation, but which side I'm standing on, it seems to me is always a wrong intention.
Mm-hmm. Very good question about right intention. When we are communicating about war, like in Ukraine or Palestine, you're probably thinking of, and you said, whichever side I take, it seems to be always wrong. It's so important to be aware that you don't have to take side in war with any of the warring parties. This is sometimes how it is presented, that if you're not supporting one of the countries at war, then you're obviously for the other one, or you're supporting the other one. As a Buddhist monk, I don't support anyone in war, and I'm against war. That is my position, anti-war, but not for any of the belligerents, not for any of the involved parties, Because I totally agree with you. And once there's a war, when you take side, both sides tend to be killing. But one can have an unambiguous position to be anti-war and anti-killing.
But if we want the war to stop, we kind of have to have a conversation somehow that get people to understand. I totally agree war is wrong, but how would we be able to talk to people on both sides with the intention that make them both agree to...
Yeah, no, that is now a wholesome intention. That doesn't mean you take side with one of them. If you were in a position that you could talk to any of the sides to try to convince them to find a ceasefire or a diplomatic solution, that would be a very wholesome intention. That's not taking side in my understanding. The first question is, are you in a position where you can influence it much?
To me, everyone would have the responsibility to be able to spread that message to everyone. And because there's always one side or the other, every people important to have that, how will we be able to have that conversation? Just start from little, but spread out word by word, one by one, to have that make people understand it's okay to not support one or the other. So that's what I'm doing.
Yeah, and I think it's completely okay. I mean, here in Australia we don't have direct war, but we may be supporting some of the warring parties. And if you now say to others, no, we shouldn't be supporting war, I think that's perfectly fine. You can say that.
People usually don't want to listen to you if you don't have a certain view, you just don't have a clear view. So that's what my question is.
Maybe.
What's the guidance?
Maybe if you give me a more concrete example, I'm not quite sure.
For example, if you want to talk to two different people with two different views, say war is not right, but they won't listen to you because you haven't got any clear direction.
Mm-hmm.
So that's their argument. And then how can we overcome that view? What?
Well, unfortunately, you may not be able to overcome that. You can always spread loving kindness, but there are people where it will not really be possible normally to engage in a beneficial conversation. You have to gauge whether there's any point in it. And some people, they are so much invested in that, and they're so convinced that their side is right and that we have to defeat and kill the evil other side. And if you come into that conversation, you will just end up with conflict. You don't have an obligation to always get fully involved in that. The most important thing is that you don't have anger in your own mind or intention for war or for killing. That next you don't do anything to support it or to encourage it or to condone it. And next that you do some things which will hopefully have a positive impact on people. What exactly you do there will depend on your smartness in that situation. And there are many situations where it would be a waste of time and effort, and it will just make yourself angry. But of course, there's also situations where sometimes people may be willing to give their life to stop war. And that is something that I totally admire. Not recently, it's almost a year now, about half a year. When you get old, time is really flying. In June, when I was in Germany, in Berlin, they have a monument to the deserters. Because there were I think it was about 35,000 deserters in the German armed forces under the Nazis. 30 to 40,000. And about half of them got executed. And this monument was extremely controversial. In fact, these deserters who were not willing to fight for the Nazis and attack other countries, and were willing to maybe even get killed themselves rather than killing others. But they were never recognized, and they were actually condemned and treated very badly. And if this deserter got executed, his wife wouldn't even get any pension after the war. She would get absolutely nothing. And the general or field marshal, the wife would get a huge pension, and he himself would get that. And only in the 1990s they changed officially the judgments, where the Nazis gave them the death penalty. And even so, the monument was really controversial. It was meant to be in the old capital Bonn, and in the end they couldn't get it there. And now they put it in Potsdam. And no, I think many of these people were highly admirable. And have you ever encountered Jehovah's Witness? Have they ever tried to convert you? Do they sometimes get onto your nerves when they try to do that? They certainly get onto my nerves. When they do that, they, also in the monastery, they come into the monastery and try to convert people to Jehovah's Witness. I once had one in Sri Lanka, in Colombo. I think I was walking arms round as a Buddhist monk in Colombo, and this Sri Lankan woman started talking to me. And I was wondering what she, and then Jehovah's Witness, and she tried to make me a Jehovah's Witness. But when they get too much onto my nerves, I remember that they were had so much conviction that they wouldn't serve in the armed forces under the Nazis. And they would rather go in the concentration camp and rather be executed themselves than killing others and joining war. And that is a way of resisting war, which I consider extremely admirable. And when the time comes, often one doesn't have to give one's life. Sometimes it is simply to disagree. And what I said now, not to create unnecessary conflict, I don't mean that you agree with war just to avoid conflict. And if anyone asks you about that and you take an anti-war position, then you can clearly express it. And if people get angry, that is their karma. There can't be anything evil about being against killing. And often it is not necessary to give your life for that. But sometimes it is just little privileges. Another example from Germany, you may notice from my accent, I'm originally from Germany, I grew up there. When I was young, they still had East Germany, which was socialist, and the country was divided. And because the Eastern system was quite repressive and economically much poorer, and all East Germans would automatically be accepted as citizens of West Germany, they would often try to cross the border. So they had the border heavily fortified, and they had mines, and they had dogs, and they had self-shooting installations, and they also had guards. However, to be one of these guards, you had to be quite reliable, and then you also were expected to shoot at your own fellow countrymen when they just try to get out of the country. And to get into that position, you may get some privileges, you may get some bananas. Bananas were famously short in East Germany because in the socialist bloc, Russia doesn't really grow bananas much. I think Vietnam had some bananas in the socialist bloc. So I remember after reunion, the East Germans, you could make them so happy if you would serve them lots of bananas when they come to visit you. It's simple things like that. And so they get little privileges, some bananas, and they may get a bit better wages and a bit more holiday. And it's very sad that people are willing to kill for that, for bananas, a bit more money, few privileges. And even then, even if it happens, you can always shoot high or low, and then you just say, oh, I just didn't hit them. They may not believe you that, and maybe you lose a job or they give you an unpleasant job, but very often it's not even required to sacrifice your life. It's often fairly minor sacrifices. And when that situation comes up, I would hope that I myself would have the strength and the conviction to rather sacrifice something than getting involved myself in war. I mean, Australia doesn't have the draft. I got into that situation after I had done my compulsory military service. I moved to West Berlin, which was under Allied control at that time, and they wouldn't draft me anymore. But then the German reunion came, and then they wanted to immediately go into the Gulf War, the first Gulf War. They wanted to support America. In the end, they couldn't do it for logistical reasons. They just didn't have capacity to fight in Iraq. We're not designed for that, but they would have liked to do it. And the theoretical possibility arose that they may draft me again and send me to Iraq. In the end, nothing of that happened, but for some period in the build-up, I had to consider that this might be a possibility. And so I had to actually really contemplate what exactly to do, and I did a conscientious objection at that time. And that was accepted. Until that was accepted, I was also contemplating at what stage I would refuse cooperation and would do passive resistance. Because the trick is, once they draft you, you're not immediately in war. You get a letter and then you have to go to this medical examination. This is quite harmless. And then you have to go to the barracks and then they dress you up. But you're still not in war, but now you're already in uniform. And then comes the deployment, and I had to contemplate at what stage I would actually stop that and say no. And I felt sure that in that case it would be I wouldn't put on the uniform. That's the absolute limit, and I would just refuse it and rather go into prison or whatever. Because it appeared insane to me that I would be killing other beings and lose my life for liberating the Kuwait oil fields for the Kuwait oil sheiks who were partying in Egypt. That didn't make any sense to me. So it's important to have that conviction. And it's interesting to see when it gets challenged, how much we are willing to stand up for it. It's a general for all the precepts. Now, how much are you willing to sacrifice to keep the precept pure?